Well, thank you again for inviting me back for part 2 of Better Health, right? So I am Joanna Hodorowska. My company is Nutrition in Motion. I basically help you fuel your whole body health, your life, and your sport, because I do work with a lot of athletes. I might look like an athlete because I am one, and that's how a lot of people I work with are athletes. So it's all about, as I mentioned before, it's all about helping you eat more real food, balance your blood sugar, manage your stress better, and lower inflammation. Because if you do those 4 things, not only are you going to live longer, but you're going to live a better quality life longer, and that's really what it's about. Life with more joy, right? So last time I was here, you had asked me about inflammation and about immunity, or your immune system. And inflammation is one of those things that a lot of people don't really know about, even though they've heard about it. And the inflammation, technically, I have it on the handout. It's a localized physical condition in which part of the body becomes red and swollen, hot, and often painful, especially as a reaction to injury or infection. So it is the body's immune response to something that's not supposed to be happening. You stub your toe, you walk into the drawer or whatever it is, it swells up and it's throbbing. That's all inflammation. But it's supposed to stop. It's part of the healing process. You get that inflammation so that the body can actually engage. Wait, that's not the word. But it's going to basically prompt that immune response to happen, and then the body protects it, that area, helps it to start healing, and then the inflammation subsides. And that can take, depending on what the injury is, it could take a few days, or it could take, like if you got a surgery, it's going to be 6 weeks. Or if you break an arm, it's going to be 6 weeks minimum. So those are all inflammation, and it's the natural body's response. The problem is when you have inflammation that's coming from food, then you are actually creating what I call fake inflammation. And so now the body's using its energy for this fake inflammation. Now you're in chronic inflammation, and the healing process never happens. It's just a constant problem. So in NIH.org, which is the National Institute for Health, they call inflammation as a protective response involving the activation of immune and non-immune cells in response to an insult, such as infection, toxic compounds, damaged cells, irradiation, and more, with the aim to restore tissue homeostasis. Because the body's always wanting to be in homeostasis. It's always wanting to be in balance. So if you throw too much of one thing in, it's going to throw off the balance. I'm just going to use soda as an option, as an example. But if you drink a lot of soda, you're now throwing a lot of phosphorus into your body because there's phosphoric acid in the soda. That actually throws off the phosphorus, magnesium, calcium balance. And so what the body tries to do is try to find that balance. And most people that are drinking soda are probably not eating a lot of green vegetables, which have a lot of the calcium and magnesium in it. And so it robs the calcium and magnesium from your teeth and bones in order to get that homeostasis and that balance in the blood system. Make sense? So that's part of that balance. I talked about balancing your blood sugar. That is one of the things that we want to do, and we also want to balance that immune system. So getting old is one of those things that it's just going to happen. But feeling old is something that you can choose to I want to feel old, or you can choose to do something differently so that you can actually never age. I intend on being 47 for the rest of my life. Actually, in my mind, I think it's 12. But body-wise, I want to look 47 for the rest of my life. So in terms of inflammation, there's acute inflammation and then there's chronic inflammation. The acute is, like I said, you stub your toe, you've got the redness, you've got the pain, you've got the swelling. it's anything that has itis in it, like any like you have pancreatitis. That is inflammation of the pancreas. You know, if you've got anything that ends with itis as a diagnosis, it's inflammation of that particular thing. An allergic response is also the immune response, and that also creates inflammation. You know, when we had COVID coming along, that's your body's immune response. And then some people have, you know, long-term COVID, that is chronic COVID. Your immune response was boosted, but it hasn't turned off. And that's what we're trying to work on, is trying to lower that chronic inflammation. On your handout, I have a little diagram of, not that you can read it, but basically the immune response is supposed to be in that beginning, in that first half of the graph, where it goes up and then it stops. It goes up and then it stops. Chronic inflammation is when it goes up and it just stays up and it just doesn't turn off. So there's things that you can do with nutrition to lower that inflammation. When you're, I work a lot with people that go in for some kind of surgeries, or they have broken bones, or, you know, they have a joint replacement. And that's when I actually perfected what I call the anti-inflammatory diet. But it's also when I noticed, like, oh, food really makes a humongous difference. So, and my hip was basically a great indicator of what foods made things hurt. I had learned this technique called nutrition response testing, and I was actually doing the training. And part of the, one of the things that came up for me was wheat and sugar at one time, and then another time it was brown rice. And I'm like, I don't even eat brown rice. I don't even eat rice at all. So what's going on? And they're like, you know what? You must be eating it somewhere. And sure enough, I was eating these vegan protein powders, and the main ingredient was brown rice protein. So I remember even going to that conference, and I was doing yoga that night. And I mean, everything hurt. It was just so painful that I did the yoga just so it would hurt a little bit less and kind of force the movement and activity. And that is one thing, especially for arthritis and really for any kind of condition. You want to have some kind of movement therapy that you love to do. But that was something that I just remember, everything just ached. And then the next day when I realized, you know, these protein powders, I'm like, okay, we're not going to eat brown rice anymore. And within 2 days, I didn't get woken up in the middle of the night with my hips just killing me and having to take an Advil or 2 or sometimes 3 and go back to bed. And then I woke up rested, and I woke up an hour earlier. And that was my way of knowing that, and my hip didn't hurt. So I knew that brown rice was a problem. And even now, if I have anything with brown rice in it, which if somebody tells me after the fact, everything in my body hurts the next day or even several hours later. Plus, within 30 minutes of eating anything with brown rice or brown rice syrup or brown rice protein in it, I am literally knocked out cold sleeping for 45 minutes. And so it's like, okay, do I really want that effect? Not really. That's my choice. I don't want that effect. I don't want that symptom, so I'm going to choose not to eat it. So I look at the food labels. You know, energy bars are something that, you know, a lot of athletes use, but a lot of other people do because it's a quick bar. I didn't have to do anything. But I have to look at the labels, and if it has brown rice anything in it, and it's like, okay, back on the shelf it goes, because I know what it's going to do. And I don't want that symptom. So it's partially starting to pay attention to what it is that you're eating and how is it that you're feeling. I just started with a client last Saturday, and she's having a knee replacement surgery. So we're working on eliminating the wheat because that was the biggest trigger for her. And so that's the fun and games she's having this week. Is I helped her with all the replacement options based on what she currently eats so that she could eliminate the pain. Because 2 weeks before surgery, you can't eat, you can't take any supplements. So fish oils and anti-inflammatory, anything you can't take, and especially not Advil. And that's the only one that worked for me. And you're basically you basically, a lot of people just go in with huge amounts of pain. The 2 weeks before my surgery, I decided to do my own anti-inflammatory plan with the anti-inflammatory, or the detox plan with the anti-inflammatory twist. So I already knew that brown rice was an issue. I already knew that sugar is an issue. I already know that wheat was an issue. So those things I made sure that I didn't have. But I also included a thing called the J-Shake anti-inflammatory elixir. And at the time I was actually juice extracting. So it's apples, lemon, kale or collards or some kind of greens, turmeric, the actual root, ginger root, daikon radish, some parsley, cabbage, and pineapple. And those are all anti-inflammatory ingredients, and I threw it all into the juice extractor. And I remember when the temperatures dropped that winter, it was a Tuesday, and the temperature dropped, and my hip was totally cranky and pissy. And within 45 minutes of drinking that elixir, all of it went away. The following week, same weather pattern, didn't wake up in the middle of the night, still didn't have the pain. So I went into surgery with zero pain. And I maintained that whole anti-inflammatory diet literally religiously for at least 2.5 years afterwards, because I'm an overachiever. So not everybody's gonna do that, but that's something that it always just made me feel better. Now I've modified it a little bit, but this is 11 years later, and I'm still predominantly on a anti-inflammatory diet because I feel better that way. And it's something that a lot of people don't realize how much better they feel until they actually implement and start implementing an anti-inflammatory diet. So that's part of what I do with clients is, okay, what are we gonna replace first? Because I mentioned the five most inflammatory components: wheat, sugar, and that includes corn syrup, brown rice for some people, but the hydrogenated fats, artificial colors, and mostly preservatives. So these are all things that are in processed food. So if you eat more real food, then you're going to be better off just starting from there. But it's trying to work with one item at a time and help you notice the difference. And you're going to notice the difference somewhere within the week to 2 weeks. You're going to notice that, oh, when I eat this is what happens. And especially when you eliminate it for 2 months, you're kind of accustomed to it and you reintroduce it. And a lot of times that's when the body gives you that humongous inflammatory response. So when I had taken out wheat for 2 weeks and then started reintroducing it, I basically had my stomach on fire, literally on fire. I stopped at, there was some bakery, some bread place in Wayne, I can't remember what it was called, but they had these great muffins. So I bought a muffin, and I only had a half of it, or maybe even a quarter of it, because that was like the little bit to reintroduce. My stomach was on fire, and that is not something that I typically experience. So a couple days later, I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna have the other half of that muffin and see if it really is the issue. And sure enough, same thing. So again, I just continued not to eat wheat. I also had all my hips and all my joints achy the next morning. So that's something that, doctor will say, oh, you're just getting old. Well, you might be getting old, but achy joints is not what God intended for you to have. So that's where the anti-inflammatory diet comes in, is that if you want to have more ability to do more of the things that you love to do, an anti-inflammatory diet is one step closer to being able to do more activities for a longer duration of time. So age is not your limitation, it's your diet. That's plain and simple, right? So in terms of symptoms, with chronic inflammation, a lot of times it's chronic pain. Migraines, joint pain, arthritis, any of the osteo or rheumatoid, any kind of gastrointestinal issues, and especially if they're all over the place kind of issues. Food sensitivities that continue to change, long COVID, immune issues like lupus, MS, any of those autoimmune issues, overweight, diabetes, asthma, obesity, those are all chronic inflammatory conditions. So the fake inflammation is basically like I said, the food. The food is creating that fake inflammation. And so the body then is, instead of healing, it's actually wasting its energy trying to combat this foreign thing that you put into your body. Last time I talked about wheat. Wheat in the US, Dr. Hyman calls it, he's one of the functional medicine gurus. He calls it Frankenwheat. And I agree, because in the 40s, during the war, the US started genetically modifying the wheat in the laboratory. When it's genetically modified in the laboratory, then the body's like, what the hell is this stuff that you're putting into my system? And it has that inflammatory response. For some people, it's GI issues. They suddenly have to go run to the bathroom. They suddenly have all the inflammation in the stomach and in the gut. Others will have the achy joints the next day. Some will have brain fog. Some will have, other issues. But it's all related to this fake inflammation from the fake food that you put into your body. Excuse me. Maybe that was intentionally, maybe that was unintentional, but you want to still start paying attention to, am I consuming any genetically modified foods? Because it might be great for the farmer and for agriculture, and increase the shelf life of that product, but it's not increasing the shelf life of you. It's actually aging you and putting stress on your body. Does that make sense? So those GMO are typically the wheat, soybeans, corn, tomatoes. Those are the primary four. So it's something just to consider. And if you can find the non-GMO, great. If anything, just start buying things that come from Europe, because Europe doesn't have GMO. A lot of people have problems with wheat in the States, and then they go to Italy and they're like, I ate pasta and pizza every day and never had a problem. Well, that's why. It's because if it's naturally pollinated and cross-pollinated in the field, that keeps up with the body. So nature helps the body and the body helps nature, and it's supposed to work hand in hand. If it's in the laboratory, that's where it becomes this fake food and the body has a inflammatory response. Any questions?
I saw turmeric listed, but not glucosamine chondroitin. Do you have a reason not to list that, or?
The reason why I don't list it is because for some people it works and for some people it doesn't.
Okay.
MSM is another one that's for some people it works and for some people it doesn't.
Okay.
And the MSM is one of those sulfur compounds. If you eat more cruciferous vegetables, then you get it automatically.
Right.
So I don't have it on there because it's not one that absolutely works for everybody.
Okay.
So, and the turmeric typically, I don't suggest pills, I suggest the actual root. And you can get that at Wegmans, you can get that at Whole Foods. Some of the other stores may or may not. And then the Indian stores have it, typically in the Indian grocery stores. And sometimes Aussie, the Asian supermarket. So when I actually went into surgery, I was taking the inflavonoid IC that I have listed in terms of the supplements. And that's all, herbal. It's got the boswellia root. It's got the turmeric, the ginger, and some other anti-inflammatory herbs and roots in it. But doctors were like, nope, can't take that. Can take the fish oils. But I was allowed to actually continue using the actual root and the actual ginger root and the actual turmeric. So even when my first meal after surgery, for some reason, Rothman didn't give me lunch that day. Surgery was at 7, and by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I still had nobody deliver a meal. So I had actually brought my juice extraction drink with me, and that was the first thing that I had. So I was already giving myself anti-inflammatory, things, because I wanted all the inflammation and the healing to be the true inflammation and healing, rather than wasting that energy on something else. And my doctors were actually quite surprised at how quickly I recovered. And part of that might be just because I'm a healthy person in general, and maybe because I was an athlete or I am an athlete, so that can help. But that anti-inflammatory protocol definitely made my healing exponentially faster than their typical clients. So that is why I didn't list that on there, is because for some it works and some it doesn't. For me, it didn't do the diddly squat. Diddly squat.
And it's also, if ever talking about that, it has shellfish in it, so if anyone has shellfish allergies, not to
Right.
use that, yeah.
Yeah. So, any other questions at this point?
Is the juice the only thing you ate, or is that like what?
No. That was like I considered that like a supplement because it was a juice extraction. It's like it gets into the blood system pretty quickly. It's like an instant IV of nutrients.
But then your meals, you just did not put in the things that you know are inflammatory.
Correct. It's yeah. So the J shake was literally I consider that like a supplement. It's something that if there's one thing that you want to do to lower inflammation, just start consuming the J shake. It'll change everything. And all the ingredients that are in the J shake are something that you can also include into your regular diet as well. But it's eliminating the things that are inflammatory and including more of the things that are anti-inflammatory. So it's finding that balance. It's not to say you will never eat blah, blah, blah again. You're never going to eat anything wheat again. You probably are, but you're probably going to choose, like I do, that it's got to be something worth it in order for me to eat it. Because if I'm going to have symptoms, then I'm going to enjoy the heck out of whatever it is that I ate. And beer is one of those where I can do it after I ride 30 to 50 miles on the bike, and it doesn't have any effect on me. But if I just had a beer, everything hurts the next day, because even though that most beers are wheat-based, so even though the hops in the wheat is actually anti-inflammatory, the wheat is inflammatory. It's very interesting, isn't it?
It is.
Like all these things. Yeah, so one of the supplements, actually, there's one that's called Inflamex, and Caprex is another one, and hops is the main ingredient. So hops are actually anti-inflammatory, but unfortunately, the other part is it's been canceled out. Like there's a balance. They're not doing neither is doing what they want to do. So,
IPAs are good for you then, right?
pardon me?
IPAs are good for you then.
For some, but if it's based with wheat, then maybe not. Maybe it's got to be made with eichhorn wheat, which is one of the ancient grains, and that has not been genetically modified. So maybe, but again, there's always a limit to some of those things too. One or two, depending if you're male or female. And after that, then there's negative effects of the alcohol and the other things that you eat because you're drinking. So again, it's all about that balance. Luckily for me, red wine had no impact whatsoever. And I had 2 glasses the night before surgery, and I went into surgery with zero pain. I was walking with a cane, but I had 0 pain. So I am a walking testimony that the anti-inflammatory diet really, really does work. So the other things to consider one is we talked about the nutrition, right? The other thing is add activities that bring you joy. Find that movement therapy that you just love and do at least 20 minutes a day. 20 minutes is the minimum. For me, it's like 40 minutes is my minimum, but it's something that I do every day just because, and I do something different every day just because that's what I love to do. Vera, she loves to run, so she runs mostly. But we're gonna go for that bike ride this summer. You want to find that social and spiritual support as well, because sometimes that's what's triggering some of that inflammation too, is unresolved issues from childhood, and you've got to talk it out. You've got to share it with somebody. You've got to get it out of your system. With my arthritis, that was one of the issues too, is I had taken on all these burdens from ancestors, and with the Polish tradition, it ended up being shock, destruction, and betrayal. Well, our history is all about shock, destruction, and betrayal. Betrayed, sometimes we felt like we were betrayed by God because, now this country is invading us. If it's not from this side, it's from that side. They typically didn't invade from the north because of the Baltic Sea. But they were constantly being invaded. So it's the shock. And then we had the whole capital razed during World War II, I think it was. And it's like, okay, there was shock, destruction, and betrayal constantly in all of history of Poland. Well, when I met my grandmother when I was 5, I was like, oh, you're in pain. Let me take that burden from you. Well, that's not my burden. I wanted to help. And that was the way I did it. I energetically took on her stuff. And that's why I have the arthritis and my 3 sisters do not. So sometimes it's that spiritual aspect too, where you've taken on somebody else's burdens, and our job is to actually unload those and forgive the people that betrayed us and shocked us and caused destruction, because that destruction was happening in my head. So that's why I suggest the social and spiritual support system, because you just never know. That's another aspect that adds to it. You have to reduce the stress and get more sleep, because when you're tired, anything that hurts is going to be really painful. Any kind of symptom that you have is just going to be exponentially worse because of the fatigue and the stress. So it's a combination of those other things. We talked about the foods that are anti-inflammatory. No, we talked about the inflammatory foods. Now you want to know some of the anti, right? So the anti-inflammatory ones, obviously all the vegetables are going to be good. They're going to be alkalizing. They help the body to repair better. The cruciferous vegetables, so that's going to be the broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, kale, Brussels sprouts, and cabbage. Those are including that on a daily basis and not one of them every day, but kind of rotate them. So one day cabbage, one day broccoli, one day, cauliflower, and just keep adding those in. Pineapple is actually anti-inflammatory, but if you have too much of it, then it's too acidic. So half a cup, that's why it's in the J-Shake, so you don't have to think about it. It's already there. The turmeric, the ginger, parsley, cilantro, any of those really dark green herbs, those are going to be also anti-inflammatory. The cold water fish, so that's going to be, and typically the cold water fish are the really strong fish, but they have all the essential fatty acids, the omega-3s that are anti-inflammatory. So it's going to be salmon, herring, sardines, mackerel. Those are the primary 4 that have the omega-3 fatty acids in it. The challenge is you can't eat enough fish every day to get an anti-inflammatory dosage. And the anti-inflammatory dosage is somewhere between, it's at minimum 1,000 milligrams a day, but 2,000 milligrams a day of just the EPA, which is the anti-inflammatory component of the essential fatty acids. You need at least a 2,000 milligram dosage. You're not going to get that from food. That would mean that you'd have to eat, if you were, let's say you were doing sardines, you would have to eat 2 cans a day. Who is going to eat 2 cans a day? You would have to do 2 pounds of salmon. So it's like, okay, who is going to be able to eat that much? So include them into your diet on a regular basis, but you may want to consider the supplements. And the ones that I listed, the Omega-Genix by Metagenics, the Omega-Genix 1000, that has 750 milligrams of that EPA in each capsule. So if you need a therapeutic dose, then you could take 2 and be done with it. A lot of the ones that are you go to Costco and you're like, oh, I bought this whole thing of fish oils, this is great. Well, you look at the label and it's like, okay, I need 8 of these in order to get a therapeutic dose. Did you really save money? No, you really didn't. You actually are spending more money, but you're getting a lot more vitamin E, you're getting a lot more other oils, rather than what it is that you really wanted, which is the therapeutic dose of the EPA. The natural painkillers are the turmeric and there's also essential oils. And the company that I work with also has turmeric, clove, and copaiba. And copaiba is like the CBD oil, except it's not CBD. It's from a copaiba plant in a tree that's in the Amazon. So those are things that you can put on topically. Some of them you can actually ingest as well. And that's something that if you don't want to take the root, you can take the essential oils instead. But they are natural painkillers. The supplements, you guys can go over the supplements at some point and just check out the link. But if you have chronic GI issues, I also offer stool analysis testing, because then we know exactly where the inflammation is and what's causing the inflammation. It could be primary digestion, it could be what you're eating, it could be other things that are going on. But those are always stress related as well, that we have to work on that part too. So I'm part nutritionist, part therapist, and it's all about helping you be more healthy so that you can get more out of your life. Make sense? The other things that are good for immune health, because that's part of your immune system and the inflammatory response. Garlic, and we're talking raw garlic. 1 clove a day, especially in the winter months, especially when you're exposed to lots of people who are sick. And if you notice that people typically get sick when they're tired and overstressed, so don't get overtired and don't get overstressed, and you might not get sick, right? But the garlic, I find that the raw garlic is the one that really works the best, rather than a pill. But if you put it into like cooked lentils or hummus or some kind of cooked beans, it takes that fire out of the garlic. And then you don't stink of garlic for 3 days. But it's something that's one thing that you can do, is add that raw garlic. You can make a tea with ginger, turmeric, and cloves, because cloves are also anti-inflammatory. And then there's a whole supplement regimen with megaviron, which is specifically developed to counteract the flu. So if you have, flu-like symptoms, that will just shorten the duration, because it's supporting the immune system with the zinc and some of the vitamin C and things like that. So zinc and vitamin C are also something that are very important. And then Metagenics has a probiotic that is specifically for immune support. So, and if you happen to be on antibiotics, then there's a specific protocol that I recommend. And I was on antibiotics last year for, I don't remember what, but the antibiotics are great until they wipe out everything, the good and the bad in your gut. And I remember talking to somebody actually this weekend. He's like, oh yeah, my whole system's whacked out for 12 weeks after taking antibiotics. Well, the whole idea is to rebuild that gut, because a lot of your immune response and your immune system is based on that gut balance or imbalance. So antibiotics, we need them, but we also need to replenish and rebuild so that we get that immune system built back up. So I'm just going to kind of review quickly how I work with clients. So depending on what it is that you come in to see me with, you are going to fill out some forms that have 4 days of food logs. I don't care what's on it. I just want to know what the patterns are. So that way I can then put together, okay, you're complaining of pain, you're complaining of GI distress, you're complaining of whatever it is. Then I can actually match what you're eating and the patterns with what your symptoms are. And we pick one thing to work on. Whether it's balancing the blood sugar, including more real food, eliminating processed foods. It's all a process. We're trying to get you from A to 8.1 or A to B. It's small progress so that you can notice the difference and you can actually repeat it and do it, and rinse, repeat, and do it. And then we will, in the follow-ups, we just see how it went, work through those challenges, work through those stressors, because those stressors are always the ones that, when you're stressed, what do you eat? Usually a bunch of junk. So how do we manage that stress? What led up to that stress and that bad eating event? that's what we work on those follow-up sessions, and then we work on the next step. Does that make sense? So it's something that there's no magic bullet, but if you start eating better, you're going to feel better. And when you feel better, you're going to be better, do better, and just do a lot more things and have more fun. And that's what we're all here to do, right? So that's it. And I have a link on the bottom of your sheet that if you want to schedule a 15-minute chat, it's just use that link and you can get onto my calendar. Okay? Now, any questions?
Just a quick one, hopefully. You list cabbage as like one of the cruciferous vegetables.
Yes.
Like, are we talking about like raw cabbage? Are we talking about cooked cabbage? Are we talking about
Yes.
coleslaw? Everything?
It's all of it.
Okay.
It's all of it. So it sometimes it depends on the time of year. So in the winter months, I typically suggest more of the cooked cabbage, just because it's easier to digest. But it's also, if you're not accustomed to eating the raw, you're not going to be able to eat a lot of it. You'll be able to start with maybe an ounce of it, and a lot of times, especially when you're in an inflammatory state, the cooked vegetables are easier to digest. So it's looking at it from the standpoint of, well, where am I now, and what am I going to enjoy? Maybe you'll only enjoy, a handful of it in your salad, rather than a whole coleslaw salad. And some people are going to argue, oh, but there's so much junk in that dressing. You got to find the balance somewhere. If you're at a pub and that's the only thing that they have as an option, you're better off having that than eating French fries and the burger and the bun. So it's looking at that balance and going, okay, what's the lesser of the evils? Okay, the dressing sucks. Okay, but I'm gonna have some of it because I want that cabbage. So it's really what your body can tolerate. And then there's the whole other viewpoint of, if you cook it, then you're killing some of the natural enzymes. It all just depends. One of the staple foods of the Polish tradition, especially for the army, was bigos, which is all cooked cabbage. That's all anti-inflammatory. Who knew? And then they always added parsley into it. So who knew that they were including that anti-inflammatory component for their soldiers so that they could, boost their immune system. So, pardon me? Yeah, sauerkraut is also, sauerkraut, that's the way that most people ate everything before modernization, because that's the way that they could get the vegetables in the winter. They just preserved them and they fermented them so that they had the natural probiotics. So natural kraut, not pickled, but if it's natural kraut, natural vegetables that you're, kimchi is another one that a lot of people will use. I don't like the hot spicy, so I tend to shy away from that. But that's one way to actually improve the digestion and the immune system, is to include that, a teaspoon or a tablespoon into a meal. So yeah, definitely fermented, cooked, or raw. It's what you can handle. Any other questions? Great. St. Patty's, right? St. Patty's Day on Sunday. Eat your cabbage.
Yes.
Eat your cabbage. Well, thank you again for having me.